Curse Breaker Darkens. By Melinda Kusira, for whom darkness calls. For all those who walk in darkness, may light always find you. Our scribe would like to thank Steve, Anna, Kelly, and all our readers for their suggestions, advice, and support. Without you, this series would still be sitting on her laptop. Thank you. Before we darken. Hi readers. As you can tell from the cover, this book doesn't feature a lot of me. Who am I? You don't know by now? Well, the best way to meet me is to head over to Curse Breaker Enchanted and read my dad's story, or sign up at mkucsera.com/welcome-characters so I can take over your inbox once a week and regale you with my adventures. I promise you'll enjoy it. Both the book and my character-run newsletter are full of magic, mayhem, and the most adorable character ever, me. I'm Rand, son of Sarn, if you hadn't guessed. This novel picks up where Curse Breaker Enchanted left off. Were there more demons loose in Mount Eredron? We're about to find out. Tighten your stirrups and hang on, because we're galloping into the mind of Jerlo. He's always been an enigma wrapped in 50 layers of religious belief and self-deception. Growing up, I didn't see a lot of our illustrious commander for reasons I can't reveal. So when our faithful scribe Melinda used her magic to view the past and started penning this little adventure, I got very excited. It's not every day you get to step into the mind of a tactical genius on a dangerous errand. So let's get to it. Into darkness. Hello darkness, my old friend, I've come to speak to you again. Under your cover, I bend, a light-loving boy to your end. My lord's throne he'll then ascend and force the world to descend into madness, my old friend, so the maggots can attend the putrid feast we will send. Prayer to the Dark One. Will it keep until tomorrow? There were some troubling elements in his tale. Nolo's question repeated like heartburn as Jerlo turned the page and stared at it. That conversation, which had happened 2 weeks ago, kept playing in the back of Jerlo's mind despite his best efforts to shut it out. Some troubling elements in his tale, hey. When aren't there? Jerlo scribbled his name on another form and set it aside. Sarn could only speak the truth as he knew it, but that boy had been tailoring his speech since way before he'd become Jerlo's problem. So that wild tale about a dark creature from another realm wreaking all manner of trouble was likely just the tip of an even larger problem. One the kid would never reveal unless forced. Jerlo sighed and turned the page. His eyes skimmed the courtesy report sent from Mount Racine's head ranger, but not a single word registered. Will it keep until tomorrow? Nolo's disembodied voice asked from the shadowed corners of his office. Jerlo dropped his head into his hands and gave in. It has to. A body and a book are unaccounted for, he said, supplying the next line to his mute audience. Dragon statues ringed his desk. Their glowing crystal eyes reminded him of Sarn. I don't know who helped Shade pick up a passenger. Or what that creature was or how they summoned it, Sarn had said 2 weeks ago on that goddamned bluff while staring into the rising dawn. A clear sign he was editing his tale for his superiors. Jerlo rubbed his aching eyes as the conversation looped back to the beginning again. Will it keep until tomorrow? Nolo's voice echoed in the windowless office. You're not here. Jerlo laid his head down on a pile of papers in defeat. Maybe it was his conscience replaying the conversation to prod him into action. A body and a book are unaccounted for. A body and a book. The body had belonged to a demon-ridden youngster named Shade, and the book likely contained spells for summoning Shade's vanquished rider. Neither were found despite a thorough search of the enchanted forest. What did his conscience expect him to do about that? Commanding Mount Eredron's contingent of rangers was his job, not finding lost articles, even if they were magically significant. Are you certain it can wait? Jerlo started. This time the voice spoke not from memory, but from the doorway. His second-in-command, Nolo, regarded him with worried eyes. Which problem are we talking about? Please tell me Sarn's staying out of trouble. He is. Nolo didn't say for now, but his tone implied it. His second shifted his weight from foot to foot, and for a moment, he doubled. Jerlo blinked. 2 Nolos now crowded the doorway. One was a man of middle 30s with skin the color of rich earth wearing the forest green uniform of the Rangers, and the other was a black smudge holding a black bow and a full quiver. Death's marksman gave Jerlo a nod, then faded into Nolo's shadow. Nolo shook himself, and the beads at the ends of his braids clicked together. You creep me out when you go all Death's marksman on me like that. Jerlo suppressed a shudder. I don't know why it keeps coming out. For years I've barely felt its touch, but lately the black quiver is always at my back, waiting. I bring out the best in everyone, Jerlo muttered as he leaned back in his chair. Very funny, but off topic. How is it out there? All quiet on the enchanted forest front. Yes, too quiet after the mayhem 2 weeks ago. Nolo searched for a chair, then gave up. Jerlo sat on the largest, most comfortable chair. In the spare chair boasted a pile of books about an order of magic-hating monks called the Seekers. It was best to know one's enemy before he came. That was Jerlo's motto, even if legends and rumors made up most of his intel. Nolo leaned against the lintel and yawned. Still no sign of the body or the book, though the former must have decomposed or been buried by now. Nothing discarded in the enchanted forest stays there for long. I'd feel better if we had proof, one way or the other. What if there are more of those things running around out there? Shouldn't we look for them? That's what I've been doing. Jerlo lifted a book from the top of the stack and tossed it to his second. What's this? Nolo caught the book and cracked it open. He grimaced at the smell and the grotesque imagery. A book about demons written by a monk 500 years ago. It's the closest match I can find to the horn thing the kid described. Are there more of them running around? Nolo paged through the book. I don't know. Jerlo threw up his hands, but he intended to find out. His continued sanity might depend on it. Is there anything else I need to deal with? No, tonight's watch was a quiet one. I had the kid straighten up the training room. He wasn't happy about it, but he didn't argue. It's not like him to acquiesce like that. He's been different since that thing went down. Different how? Jerlo sat up straight in his chair. Less argumentative and more distracted. It's like the bulk of his attention is focused elsewhere on something I can't see. I don't like it. Nolo's grip on the book tightened until his knuckles paled. Neither did Jerlo, but the conversation died, and the M word echoed in the silence. It was a subject neither would broach because the kid might be the only living mage left thanks to the Seekers. What a frightening thought that was, and he and his second tried hard to ignore it. Nolo backed away from the dreaded M word until his back touched the door. He was God-touched by an aspect of death, but not a mage. What he did wasn't magic. It was a skill with deadly consequences. We all grieve in our own ways. Maybe that's all it is. The kid knew shade for years before that worthy's death. Nolo scrubbed a hand over his face. Go rest. I need you sharp tonight. And I should finish some paperwork. Jerlo gave the never-ending pile a glum look. It would take an ocean of ink and several years to make a dent in it. May I hold on to this? Nolo held up the book on demonology, and the moaning face etched into its cover stared at Jerlo with hollow, eyeless pits. If you're seeking a little light reading, try the Sarn legal code. I guarantee you'll pass out before the end of Chapter 1. But that tome in your hands is likely to induce nightmares. If you don't need it, I'd like to give it a read to see what we're up against. There could be more of those things. Go for it, just don't blame me if you wake up screaming from night terrors. I won't. You should try to get some rest too. Jerlo waved off his second's concern, and his gaze landed on a half-finished letter. What had he meant to write? Not anything important, or he'd remember. Have a good morning. Nolo went out and closed the door. Hey, a good morning would bring answers. So far this one's brought only questions. Jerlo set the letter aside and leaned back in his chair. Outside his windowless office, the sun was preparing to ascend its throne. Even though he couldn't see it, he felt its rise, and he imagined its first pink rays striking Mount Eredren's craggy face. Through its thick stone walls, that light pushed into his body, warming his bones. Jerlo laced his fingers together over his flat stomach and closed his eyes. Something had niggled at him since before Nolo had entered. Jerlo groped after it, but the thought fled through the holes in his mind. When he finally wrestled it into submission, his vision grew wavy. Everything faded to gray, then green as the view steadied. Jerlo now peered out of the eyes of a 14-year-old mage-gifted child. It was Sarn's memory, stolen during a strange interview, by accident of course. Jerlo was no thief. It had become part of the flotsam and jetsam cluttering his mind, until something had reminded him of it. Every element was the same as the last time Jerlo had viewed this memory. Hadrovel's miserable eye looked through a chink in a stone wall, not a welcome sight. "I'll pull you out when they're gone. Be as silent as sleeping stones," said the psycho-orphan master as he pushed a hand through that hole. But he and Sarn, they dodged it. And the sudden movement made them dizzy, so they slid down the wall into a puddle of elbows and knees. Jerlo froze the memory and stepped outside of Sarn's body, in the windowless cell imprisoning the kid. There were 13 cairns. Inside their ring, a forest of white candles formed a 13-pointed star circumscribed by a circle. The white-clad sacrifice shade was it bent to light their wicks. Jerlo turned, scanning the candle-lit cave. "Where are you, Hadroville? What part did you play in this monstrous endeavor?" But this had already happened, and the viewpoint was limited to what Sarn could see through a chink in his cell. All else was flickering shadows on stone. 13 black-robed people chanted as they marched in. Deep cowls swallowed their faces, leaving their identities a mystery Jerlo couldn't probe. Was one of them Hadroville? Was the psycho-orphan master their ringleader? Was Shade the recipient of the first demon this group of nutcases summoned, or the 13th? Jerlo rewound the memory. Hadrovel's black eye peered in. Was there a wicked gleam in its depths? Was the psycho's voice saccharine against that chanting grating on Jerlo's nerves? Or was the constant replaying of the scene somehow changing it? Jerlo pressed his thumbs into his eyes. Could his perceptions color someone else's memory? Anything was possible when magic was involved. Jerlo had accidentally excised this memory 2 weeks ago, and he hadn't dared to repeat it. "I'll pull you out when they're gone. Be as silent as sleeping stones," said the psycho-orphan master in that memory. Be as silent as sleeping stones. The phrase looped through Jerlo's mind as he leaned over and rifled through the books stacked on the chair beside his desk. One of them had referenced sleeping stones. But which one? 12 tomes stared back at him. Most were histories he'd skimmed for accounts of the Seekers and anything that might be demonic activity. The 13th he'd lent to Nolo. Discomfited by the eerie repetition of the number 13, Jerlo pushed up from his chair. There was one way to find out what role Hadroville had played in the demon summoning thing. Jerlo strode through half-deserted tunnels as the bells of Mount Eredren struck 5. Servants hustled by carrying trays of food and ewers of water. Steam curled up from a passing cart. Its covered dishes reflected the sprawling Lumiere mosaic overhead that lit the servants' way. I was a fool to put off this meeting. Jerlo rapped his fist against the wide banister of the grand stair looping between the ornate levels. His hands were small for a man of exactly 5 feet, but they were proportional to his small stature and quite capable of dealing damage when needed. A dozen stave-wielding statues turned their heads as he strode by. Each gleaming crystal eye hurled an accusation at him. Jerlo blinked, and they faced forward again. He rubbed his eyes, and his bushy brows tickled his fingers as exhaustion mauled Jerlo. Lights twinkled in the black-spangled tide reaching out for him, but he shoved the need to sleep down. I won't rest until I've faced that monster and extracted some much-needed answers. Jerlo stepped off the stairs, hurried to an office on this level, and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" asked a woman. Jerlo didn't recognize her voice. Where was Lord Olav? This was his office. Maybe he'd hired a secretary since his last visit. Nobles did such things all the time. Their staff tended to change with their moods. Jerlo, the commander of the Rangers. The door swung in, framing a middle-aged woman clad in purple. Is Lord Olav Nalshira in? Jerlo tried to see past the handsome woman, but her curvy body blocked the door. In her heeled sandals she stood a half-foot taller than him, putting her ample bust at eye level. She shook her head. Wisps of black hair escaped her chignon, and they stirred in the mountain's quiet breathing. No, he's in the capital with his cousin, the Lord of the Mountain. They're not due back until the summer session closes. Is there something I can help you with? That depends on whether you have a key to the oubliette. Her face blanched and she clutched her throat. Why would you want to go to that godforsaken place? There's someone in there I need to talk to. She shook her head. Oh no, there's only one monster incarcerated there. You can't possibly need to speak to him. If there were any other way, I'd take it. Do you have a key to it? Her hand dropped from her throat to the chain around her neck. Through the violet of her dress she gripped a slender object. If I don't have this key, what then? Then I'll wait, but I'd rather not. This issue is important. It affects Lord Jorrent's personal property. An object he'd be quite angered to find damaged, if you catch my meaning. Jerlo threw in a wink, because his bald statement demanded it. She nodded, though her face remained bloodless. I know something about the object in question. How does talking to that monster safeguard it? He can help me eliminate a threat that's long been festering. This monster played a role in unleashing it. Jerlo's lips twisted in disgust at the thought of Hadrovel being helpful. She took that all in with a couple of blinks, then nodded. I don't like this, but I can't refuse your request either. If talking to that monster will safeguard that object, then I must help you. But I warn you. He's been incarcerated for almost 5 years. Being so long in solitary confinement does strange things to the mind. Don't expect to get much from him. Thanks for the warning. I'll keep that in mind. Shall we go? Jerlo gestured to the deserted hallway behind him. He felt the crystalline glares of the statues parked there. She debated for a moment, then darted inside, but she left the door cracked open. Let me just grab a light. We should go in the daylight when the tide's out. And why is that? You'll see. Her ominous promise echoed in the sudden quiet. Jerlo patted his pockets for his chunk of Lumiere crystal. He'd need its light where he was going. What have you gotten yourself into? Trouble most likely, but he pushed that thought away. She reappeared before he could brood over much, and slipped past him into the corridor. Jerlo rushed to catch up. She had a long stride accentuated by the divided skirt flaring out behind her. You could just give me the key. I'm not going to release him, just talk to him. Do you even know where the oubliette is? She didn't bother to look at him. Her long legs kept churning despite her impractical garb. When she entered a stairwell, she descended without a backward glance. It's not in the dungeon, is it? At his question, she paused and leaned against the enclosing wall. The staircase wound around a central pillar the Lithurians had left undecorated. Maybe they'd missed it during their last carving spree. The bluish glow of the Lumiere crystal in her hand only emphasized its plainness. As she studied him, the play of light and shadows on her sharp features rendered her into a caricature. No doubt she was trying to figure him out. Plenty of women had tried, but none had ever succeeded. Jerlo folded his arms over his chest. What's your name? I told you mine. It's only fair you return the favor. No. She turned on her heel and passed around a bend, taking the cold light streaming from her hand with her. Only her soft footsteps signaled she was still on the staircase. Wonderful, I'm heading to the oubliette to talk to a madman guided by a bitch called No. You have no sense of irony. Jerlo cast his eyes heavenwards at the darkness falling over him. He withdrew a yellow pebble from his pocket. For a moment he held the sun in his hands. Its cool polished globe nestled between his thumb and forefinger. Opening his hand, he released the Lumire crystal's glow. Concentric rings of brilliance pushed the darkness away, but it wasn't the sun. This magically generated light was as cold as the damp stairwell. Someone needs to interview Hadroval. Must that someone be you? Jerlo started. Who had whispered that? The voice was pitched low like a man's, but its softness could have masked a woman's voice. Who goes there? The woman called no had either left the stairwell or descended too far to hear his shout. You tried to kill him. What makes you think he'll speak to you? Who said that? Show yourself. Jerlo pivoted, scanning the smooth stones for signs of his mysterious interlocutor. He held the Lumire crystal at eye level, as the old rhyme recommended. But its light didn't reveal anything but bare stone that was as gray as a storm cloud. Jerlo, who are you doing this for? Who are you? How did you know my name or my plan? Jerlo whirled, but there was still nothing but Lumire crystal-lit stone and shadows above and below him. How did this creep know about Sarn? That boy was a secret he and his rangers had kept for 5 years. How do you know about him? Answer me. You're not doing this for Sarn. No, you're still waiting for him to become someone else's problem. Someone else's problem, the phrase trapped Jerlo and its truth hammered at him. He tried to shake it off so he could get a fix on that voice. But it was bouncing around so much, it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it faded out, leaving Jerlo alone on the stairs. Was the Lumire crystal he clutched somehow dimmed by this exchange? Because the shadows were sharper below. Jerlo rubbed tired eyes with his free hand, dispelling the fantasy until a moan startled him. He'd forgotten about his guide. Jerlo hurried, but his short legs curtailed him to one step at a time. Around the 6th bend he found her. Her Lumire crystal had fallen several steps below her, and its cold light illuminated a crumpled body wrapped in purple crepe. Jerlo peeled the thin silky garment away from her skin and felt for a pulse. Finding it, he probed for broken bones as he turned her onto her back. No screams meant she likely hadn't broken anything. She blinked dark eyes up at him from a face that remained beautiful despite the new bruises. She was a pretty complication, nothing more. Jerlo reminded himself. What happened? I thought I heard something. When I glanced behind me, I must have stepped on my skirt or caught it on something, because the next thing I know, I'm falling face first into darkness. What did you hear? She shook her head and winced. I thought I heard a whisper, but it might have been an echo. It was too soft to hear well. So there had been someone else on the stairs. Relieved, Jerlo squatted on the stair nearest her. Could someone have pushed you? No, I fell on my own and reinforced the stereotype of a helpless female. She twisted her lips in disgust and pushed away from him, so she could sit up unaided. Jerlo barked a mirthless laugh at her self-pity. What's so funny? Lady, I don't know who you've been hanging out with, but all the women I know are strong and brave in their own ways. You're lucky to know such women. Luck has nothing to do with it. Now what's your name? I don't want to shout, hey you, next time I lose track of you. Her face reddened, but she held out a hand. I'm Vanya, and by all that's holy, I hurt. Well, Vanya, it's nice to meet you. I think we should sit here for a spell until you're less sore, unless, of course, you want to hand over that key. I can find the oubliette on my own. Jerlo eyed her ample bosom, and the silver chain nestled between the tops of her exposed breasts. No, I have to take you. Vanya gripped the key through the thin material of her dress. I have to make sure that monster stays locked up. Why would anyone release him? I don't know, and if you didn't have express permission from the Lord of the Mountain himself, I wouldn't take you. Good to know he's in a high-security ward. Quite secure. There's no escape for that villain, not so long as I hold the key. Vanya lifted the key from between her shapely breasts and regarded it, as if it held the secrets of the universe. You were one of his victims. Jerlo nodded as a great many troubling things fell into place. But Vanya was so lost in her contemplation, nothing external registered. A man set apart, a child caught between. In these troubled times the twice dead still breathes, she said as she turned the key in her calloused fingers. What was that? Vanya shook herself. Just something Lord Jorinth, the Lord of the Mountain, often says. Every time I hear it, I remember that horrible day. Vanya dropped the key into her blouse and gave her corset a push as the key disappeared between her pale breasts. Those perfect globes had escaped bruising during her fall. But her hand hovered over them as her chest swelled with mounting anxiety. Do you ever think of that day? That day, the day when Hadrovol should have met his end. Oh, Jerlo recalled that day with startling clarity. Why didn't he die? Vanya asked. Her plaintive question was a thread that snapped and twisted in the currents stirring the air. Someone else's problem. 5 years ago. Soon the kid will be someone else's problem. Soon, oh God, let it be soon. I can't take much more of this. Jerlo pushed the door open. Guilt entered with him, darkening the sunlit bedroom turned infirmary. A boy of 15 sat on a cot with one knee drawn up. He reread his chin on it as he stared moodily off. His other leg was swathed in a soft cast up to his thigh, and the opposite arm sported a matching cast. More bandages peeked out of the low neck of his oversized tunic. He had long limbs emphasized by his pose, too long for a boy who was not quite 16 yet. At his side another boy sat close but not touching. He was about 9 years old and at first glance looked nothing like his troubled half-brother. But that was a good thing because it meant they had only one mage ling to manage, and that was more than enough for any sane man. Soon he'll be someone else's problem, soon, Jerlo reminded himself as he caught sight of the burning green eyes of the older boy. But not soon enough. Murren halted mid-sentence. The lad had been trying to coax his elder brother into doing something, but Sarn just sat there staring off, ignoring everyone. At least he wasn't comatose anymore. A vicious scar traced the left side of his face thanks to a knife-happy psychopath. But even it couldn't mar his perfect, chiseled features. That angelic face arrested Nolo, and his second-in-command stumbled to a halt behind Jerlo. Shock pinned the tall ranger to the spot as he reached for his boss. Jerlo suppressed a sigh. He knew what his second wanted to ask, and he had no answer for the question buzzing around them. Sarn was an enigma, but the Lord of the Mountain owned the kid. Soon said Lord would hand the kid off to someone more qualified to deal with an abused, magically gifted boy. Any day now that transfer of custody would happen. Any day now. Why God not today? God didn't answer. It was an uncharitable question anyway, and the Almighty had better things to do right now, like smite a psychopath. Jerlo ran a hand over his afro, and its kinky curls resisted his attempt to flatten it. He let his hand fall to his belt and rest on its pouches, just in case the kid's magic got uppity. Thank God Sarn's magic hated water. Nolo remained rooted to the spot, staring at the kid. A black curve flickered in his left hand. Oh, Death's marksman was fighting to break out, not a good sign. What about the lantern-jawed kid was drawing Death's marksman out? Death's Ranger would be a more appropriate title. The ancient hero who first won that mantle of power likely had no idea the title might be problematic for a later bearer. Jerlo opened his mouth to say something. Before he could, Death's marksman receded. Nolo blinked, and his hand was once again empty. Death's bow had gone wherever magical items went when not in use. I can take care of this on my own if you can't handle it, Jerlo said to Nolo in an undertone, not that it mattered. Sarn wasn't listening and hadn't moved a muscle since they'd entered. His luminous green eyes stared into the middle distance, seeing nothing. The sunlight falling through the room's 3 windows gilded the kid, making him seem more than human. Sitting in his shadow, Murren watched them with narrowed eyes. He was listening, but he was just a normal kid and of no consequence. I can handle it. Nolo gestured for a surprised Jerlo to proceed. His second must be nuts, but whatever. Jerlo straightened his forest-green tunic and approached the two kids. As he neared, the glow of Sarn's eyes differentiated into two wheels of green flame revolving in place of his irises. Those magnificent eyes broadcasted his pain. Soon it would be soothed by the hand of justice, if all went well at the execution. Guilt rested a cold hand on Jerlo's shoulder as it whispered in his ear. Your negligence put that pain there. Your lack of care broke him. If you had only looked, but you didn't. What was more important than saving an innocent life? Paperwork, whispered his conscience, digging a knife into his heart and twisting it. Pain shot through Jerlo, but he ignored it. He was having an attack of regret, not a heart attack. Judging by the hollow look in Nolo's black eyes, he was experiencing a similar attack. Jerlo struggled to shake it off and pull himself together. He was here on a mission, but it was confounded by the accusation standing next to him, waiting for an apology that would never come. The damage was done, and the kid was almost healed. An apology tendered now would be an insult. Sarn deserved better than that, better than the reluctant rangers turned babysitters protecting him from discovery until his owner found more qualified caregivers. Oh God, let that be soon. Take this mistake off my hands and give it to someone who can fix it because I can't. A chill breeze fluttered the curtains and Jerlo shivered. Outside, the sun dipped behind a cloud, casting the room and its miserable occupants in shadow as nature herself extended a finger and shook it at Jerlo, adding her accusation to the pile, crushing him into the stone floor. The kid survived, Jerlo reminded the guilt and accusations crowding him. Before they could tie his vocal cords into a knot, Jerlo cleared his throat. A mosaic depicting Shayari's Sylvan Queen spread out from his scuffed boots. Her silver bows pointed to the kid he'd come to talk to. Sarn still hadn't looked at him, but that was fine. The kid had earned his anger bone by broken bone. And soon the kid would be someone else's problem, so let him stew in that anger. It incentivized him to heal up. A door creaked open behind Jerlo. He turned and nodded to Sue, the ranger's medic, and his wife, Mariska. They were good solid folk who'd stepped up and offered a place for Sarn to stay when the healers had rejected him. Mariska's knowing eyes met his. She knew what grisly errand had brought Jerlo here today. Mariska beckoned to Murren. Come with me, lad. These men need to talk to your brother. No, whatever they have to say to him, they can say to me. Murren crossed his arms over his chest and gave his elder brother a pleading look. Sarn stirred like a dreamer, only just awakening, but he held his peace. Not this time, lad, it's not something for young ears. Mariska dried her hands on her apron as she approached. She must have been in her still room decocting something medicinal if the astringent smell accompanying her was any indication. The not for young ears part caught Sarn's attention. He laid a hand on Murren's shoulder to quell any further outbursts. Go with her, he said, forcing the words out. His voice was raspy from disuse. Judging by Murren's gobsmacked expression, Sarn hadn't spoken in a long while. I'll be all right, Sarn added when Murren looked ready to argue the point. Murren nodded, then hopped off the cot and followed Mariska out. Before she closed the door, she gave her husband a glance. Sue nodded and remained in the background like a good ranger should. He was a familiar fixture in this makeshift infirmary, and likely a comfort for the strange boys still ignoring them. Look, you don't have to worry about Hadroval anymore, Jerlo began when Nolo didn't take the reins of the conversation. At the mere mention of the former orphan master, Sarn cringed. Jerlo wished he'd found a better opener. Yeah, well, he was arrested, tried and convicted of his crimes against you and the other orphans. Of course, they had vanished, instead of becoming yet another problem for Jerlo to solve. Neither had the guards looked very hard for them. Certain people should be allowed to slip through the cracks. You don't have to testify, do you understand me? Nod so I know I'm getting through. Jerlo waited for a response. Any would do. Sarn just stared at the wall behind them. What he means, Nolo began, entering the disastrous conversation at last, is that we had enough evidence to convict Hadroval without your testimony. He's been found guilty of attempted murder, torture, and abuse of the minors placed in his care, Jerlo added. Each of those crimes carries the death penalty. Too bad you can only kill a man once. Nolo glared at Jerlo for that last comment, then shook his head. It was the truth, so Jerlo didn't retract what he'd said or apologize for it. He lifted an eyebrow and invited his second to continue this farce. The execution is in about an hour. Normally, we don't allow any person under the age of 16 to witness it. But since you'll turn 16 in 3 months anyhow, we're bending the rules for you but not for the boy. He's too young, and death is a grisly business. Jerlo's lips twisted in disgust at the idea of a 9-year-old watching the Lord of the Mountain wring enough pain out of the convicted to discourage copycats. Nolo gave Jerlo the "I'll take it from here" look, and Jerlo nodded. We thought you might need closure, the kind you can only get from seeing justice meted out to the one who hurt you. A muscle throbbed in the kid's clenched jaw, but Sarn stared past them as if they weren't there. Maybe they weren't. Maybe this was all a nightmare Jerlo could wake from at any moment to discover he was not responsible for an illegal mage, and worse, a child. Jerlo pinched the inside of his wrist until pain shot up his arm. No, this was real. God damn him for doubting it. Jerlo ground his molars together and counted to 10, then to 20. Still no response from the silent kid. Maybe Sarn was still too shell-shocked by what had happened. Hadrovel had abused the kid for over a year before almost killing him, and the kid had never said a word about that abuse. Maybe we were wrong to come here. Jerlo turned and caught his second's eye. Will I see you down there? Or are you staying with the mute problem I can't wait to get rid of? Jerlo waited for an answer to his unspoken question. As soon as Lord Jornth finished meting out justice, he'd reclaim his property, and the Rangers could stop babysitting a mage-gifted kid who refused to acknowledge their existence. You're safe now. Nolo approached the silent kid with open hands. That's what we came to tell you. Hadrovel will be executed at noon today. It's over. You're safe now. Still no response, but had a flicker of emotion passed across the kid's face? Might there still be some fire in him yet? Jerlo opened the door, and ranks of diaper-clad cherubs glared at him. Lumir crystals made up their glowing halos. He shook his head. Marishka and Sue had some strange notions about decor. Well, that was a total disaster, Nolo commented after the door clicked closed. Of course it was. You let me do all the talking, and I have no experience with children. Jerlo glared at his second. I know, and I regret that. Yet you let it happen, why? Diplomacy is your thing, not mine. Nolo shook his head and stared at his hands for a moment. I just froze when I saw him, looking so hale and hearty. Nolo rubbed his eyes. I can't get that image out of my head. I thought he was dead. How could someone so young survive such a beating? A normal kid couldn't, but a normal kid doesn't have glowing eyes. Jerlo retrieved his sheath from behind a malicious-looking cherub and added it to the belt buckled over his tunic. Nolo slung his sheath over his shoulder. True, but I thought we'd get more of a reaction. If I were him, I'd demand to see Hadrovel hang. Hell, I'd volunteer to cut off his head. Maybe you'll get the chance. What do you mean? Nolo caught Jerlo's arm as he passed. I thought the executioner had first dibs. True, but I have a feeling this isn't over, not by a long shot. Keep your wits about you and your weapons to hand. You think someone will interrupt the execution? All I know is that Hadrovel had powerful friends. One of them used to be the Lord of this mountain. But not anymore, not after what he did to Sarn. Only us Rangers and the Lord of the Mountain are privy to that. No one else knows, and his lordship wants to keep it that way. So stay sharp. What about Sarn? Are we just going to leave the kid here? He needs closure. In answer, Jerlo regarded the closed door. Through that iron-banded collection of planks, he saw that silent kid trapped by pain and betrayal. The sight sent a pang through his heart, an organ he'd thought dead and dusted from disuse. Something about that kid had quickened his heart and made him care. But that kid would soon be someone else's problem. Yes, it's over for him. Not everyone can stomach a public execution. It's better if he skips that, Jerlo said into the sudden quiet, muffling the sounds of Mount Eredren's hustle and bustle. Especially if the trouble Jerlo sensed brewing came to pass. Lord, let me be wrong about that, please. But the sick feeling in the pit of his stomach grew as they wound through the stronghold. The change in decor from cherubs to depictions of ancient warriors engaged in Aristeia only exacerbated the feeling of doom hanging over Jerlo's head. When the labyrinthine darkness gave way to sunshine as he and Nolo exited the stronghold, that feeling of doom crystallized into certainty. Something bad was coming, and it wore the black robes of the executioner. An hour later, Jerlo leaned against the railing of the lowest balcony, girdling the mountain. A metal staircase snaked up from the meadow, providing access. Below, two smiths locked the wheeled structure in place, then beckoned to a cloaked man and his retinue to mount it. A crowd gathered around the four masons, assembling a platform in the meadow's middle. My lord, Jerlo bowed to the tall man who stepped off the staircase onto the parapet. Is everything ready? Lord Jorinth Nalshira jumped down onto the balcony proper. A deep cowl shadowed his face, hiding the same features which had graced his ancestor, the betrayer, Reve Nalshira, the first regent of Shayari. It is, sir, and it's an honor to have you attend, said the current head of the guards, a man whose only distinguishing feature was his elaborate mustache. Gidron had waxed his facial hair into a series of cascading curlicues. On any other day, Jerlo would have commented on the absurdity. The sight just invited jokes. Maybe that was Gidron's intent, to bring a bit of levity to the somber event, to remind everyone that life was about laughter, not pain. Or maybe Jerlo was giving the slippery guard captain too much credit. Gidron dropped to one knee, took Lord Jorinth's hand in his, and kissed his lordship's signet ring. The sun caught the howling wolf etched into the ruby stone as Lord Jorinth withdrew his hand. Jerlo shook his head at the kiss-up and resisted the urge to roll his eyes. The only lord he bent his knee to was God, no one else. That was why he was here at this far-flung outpost of civilization. No nobleman in his right mind wanted such an independent-minded vassal, except Lord Jorinth. But he was shrewder than most nobles. Then bring out the accused. Lord Jorinth waved. If my lord would take a seat. Gidron gestured to an iron and Lumiere crystal inlaid throne overflowing with pillows on a makeshift dais. But Lord Jorinth shook his head. I prefer to stand when I mete out justice. All the better to tower over people, Jerlo muttered under his breath. Indeed, Lord Jorinth was the tallest man on the balcony, by a wide margin. Of course, it's good to remind everyone of their place every now and again. Lord Jorinth gestured to the Chief Justice to begin the proceedings. Gidron assumed that comment was meant for him, and the guard captain went quite pale until Jerlo elbowed him in the gut. Honesty gets you further than flattery. You might want to keep that in mind. Before Gidron could reply, the Chief Justice stepped onto the stone platform and raised a scroll. Since this was an outdoor event, Nolo was down there with a complement of rangers, holding the crowd back. Each ranger wore a bright green sash over their forest green uniforms, but even from Jerlo's vantage, his people were hard to see. Damn the stupid rules divvying up Mount Eredren's defenses. He should be down there with his men, but no, he was stuck up here with the nobles. A full complement of guards exited a cave in the mountain's feet. Their helms glinted in the sunlight, falling through a cleft in the clouds as they processed around Mount Eredren's base. Make way for the condemned, they shouted as they forced the crowd to part. Lord Jorinth held up a hand. Wait, bring him here. I wish to speak to the condemned. The column changed directions and cut across the crowd to the metal staircase. Two guards detached from the others and led a third man up the black twisting spiral. They stopped several steps below the top, so the condemned man's head never rose above their lord and masters. Give them some room, Jerlo bellowed as he waved Lord Jorinth's attendants back. That means you two. He grabbed Gidron's arm and towed the guard captain aside. "Unhand me. I must protect our lord." "Your men will. That's what you pay them for." Gidron shot Jerlo a killing glare. But anything he could have said would have besmirched his men's honor, so Gidron stayed quiet. He might look ridiculous with his curly beard flowing out of the Y-shaped slit in his barbet, but the guard captain was no fool. Sunlight refracted off his men's helmets until the sun noticed an execution was imminent, and hid its fiery eye behind the ominous clouds rolling in from the north. A gust of wind carried with it the scent of roasting meat, and Jerlo shook his head. Hawkers had no shame. But there was no law against selling sweetmeats at an execution, so he let it go and focused on the standoff in front of him. This was the first time the Lord of the Mountain had come face to face with the former orphan master since the latter man's disgrace. Hadrovel looked the worse for wear, clad only in a dirty loincloth. The former orphan master stood between the guards with his shackled hands interlaced over his stomach. He had powerful shoulders that tapered to a slim waist and well-muscled legs. Catching him had been quite an endeavor until a rumor had reached the creep about where he could find Sarn. Drugged and in traction, the kid slept through the entire capture, never realizing his sick room had been turned into an elaborate trap. Not even his brother knew what had gone down, and that had taken some doing, since the child had stuck close to his injured brother. Lord Jorinth approached the parapet and glowered down at the accused. "I trusted you. I handed over my most valuable possession to you, and you sought to destroy it. Why?" Jerlo blinked. He must have misheard. Though he doubted since his hearing was exceptional. What was Lord Jorinth's most valuable possession? And why did his heart sink at the question? Jerlo glanced at Gidron, but there was no sign the guard captain had heard anything. "Answer me." Lord Jorinth withdrew a dagger and tapped its tip against Hadrovel's throat. "Answer me, or I will make you beg for mercy that will never come." "I did what I had to do." Hadrovel tilted his head back, exposing more of his throat. "And you'll do what you must. So it goes." "That's all you have to say? That cop-out? I don't believe you." "Believe what you must. It's the truth." Lord Jorinth nodded to the guards. "Get him out of my sight." They bowed to their lord, then escorted Hadrovel down the stairs. "Make way for the condemned," they shouted at the crowd parting before them. Lord Jorinth didn't put his dagger away until Hadrovel mounted the platform. As he rested his calloused hands on the scalloped parapet, the wind billowed his cloak, revealing a broadsword sheathed at his hip. Footsteps clanged on metal as a young man ascended the stairs. Why was I not informed of these proceedings? When he saw his father, Morlund halted on the stairs. He was clad in light armor, having just come from a sparring session. At 22, he was the spitting image of Lord Jorinth, and he flaunted that, despite his uncanny likeness to one of the most reviled men in Shayari's checkered history. "This is a private matter that does not concern you." Lord Jorinth glanced away from his eldest son. Morlund scanned the balcony, then zeroed in on Jerlo, who sighed. The young nobleman would darken his door later for that explanation. His father should tell him what was going on, but if Jorinth did, he'd acknowledge that his illegitimate son was running things because his heir was a 16-year-old spoiled brat disinterested in doing anything resembling real work. Oh, the tangled webs noblemen wove when they did their begetting on the wrong side of the sheets. "Return to your sparring. This matter will be concluded shortly." Lord Jorinth waved his eldest son away. "As you wish, father." Morlund put an extra bite into the word father, then inclined his head and descended with his head held high. For the crowd's benefit, he whistled for his destrier and vaulted onto her sleek black back before she came to a halt. They charged off, giving the crowd a bit of a thrill. A few ladies even swooned. Jerlo rolled his eyes. Oh, to be young, virile, and handsome again. The Chief Justice waited for Lord Jorinth's signal to continue. "The accused is hereby stripped of all names and titles. Nameless and naked, he entered the world, and nameless and naked, he shall return to the formless darkness that spawned him." As he rolled up the scroll, the Chief Justice nodded to the guards. They removed Hadrovel's loincloth without a struggle. For endangering the lives of the children in your care, we, the people of Mount Eredron, find you guilty. Stand now to receive your punishment. The Chief Justice stepped aside as the guards tied Hadrovel's arms to a post. With the lash we spill your blood to wash away your sins. Begin. At those words, the executioner swung a cat o' nine tails, and a guard called out the strokes. Wine, sir? Asked a serving girl with lowered eyes as she held a cup out to Jerlo. Thank you. He sipped it with raised eyebrows. Lord Jorinth had selected a vintage from his private collection for the occasion. Not something Jerlo would have done. 99, shouted the guard, who sounded a bit hoarse. 100. Enough. The Chief Justice raised a restraining hand. Hadrovel's back was a red ruin. Rivulets of blood ran down his legs and dyed the platform red. He slumped against the post, looking resigned but not repentant. What a monster! What happens now? Ranispara asked from behind Jerlo. Oh, and this came for you. I didn't think it should wait. She looked a bit pale but resolute in her greens as she thrust a folded paper at Jerlo. He sighed when he saw the Nalshira seal on it. He didn't waste any time, did he? Jerlo broke the seal and frowned at its contents. Nope, his lordship stormed in demanding answers about a half an hour ago. I came here as soon as he left. What did you tell him? Ranispara folded her arms. I told him he'd have to talk to you, and that's when he handed me that missive. I'll deal with this later. Jerlo pocketed the polite demand for information Lord Morland had delivered. If only nobles talked to each other, it would save their vassals a lot of time. Ranispara grimaced at the scene below. Hadrovel lay spread-eagled on his back while guards tied each of his limbs to a different horse. 4 steeds snorted and stamped as they waited to tear him apart. Grooms held their bridles, but they were as impatient as the crowd to get this over with. Ranispara shoved a lock of dark hair out of her eyes. It had escaped the tight braid down the 20-something ranger's back. I should go back and mind things in case, she broke off, but her request was obvious. The worst bits are yet to come. What his lordship has planned won't be pretty, but if you can stomach it, I'm sure Nolo could use a hand with that rabble. Things are bound to get interesting. Jerlo waved to the swelling crowd and the teasing hints of bright green, marking his rangers. They had done the smart thing, and created a human wall between the crowd and the platform. Oh goody, crowd control, my favorite duty. She gave him a wry smile. Then get on with it. Jerlo motioned to the metal staircase leading to the meadow. Ranispara gave him a mock salute. My husband will just love that. I'll bet he will, Jerlo said to the clanging retreat of the only female ranger in the ranks. They're starting again. Gidron drifted over, plate in hand, and pointed to the Chief Justice with a chicken leg. A knife glinted in the sun as the blue-robed judge held it aloft. Let your sins be scattered to the 4 winds, then burned until no remnant of your evil remains. From earth you came, to incessant howling we send you. Wander forever without kith or kin to mourn you. We condemn you. The knife flashed as it slashed Hadrovel's chest open. The Chief Justice stepped back and held the bloody instrument aloft to loud cheering. Behold the blood of the slain. Whips cracked, and the 4 horses bolted, each in one of the cardinal directions. Hadrovel grimaced and grunted in pain as his limbs stretched to the breaking point. The crowd held its breath, waiting as the horses strained and pulled with all their might. Their hooves dug deep furrows into the ground, but Hadrovel's limbs refused to separate. Why aren't they tearing him apart? No man can survive that. Lord Jorinth pounded his fist on the parapet, but he didn't stop it. Guards whipped the horses to encourage them to pull harder, until they were lathered with sweat. Enough. Lord Jorinth sliced a hand through the air, and his bellow stopped the horses in their tracks. If you want something done right, you should do it yourself, Jorinth muttered as he swung onto the parapet and jogged down the stairs. Jerlo caught the implied with me, so he elbowed the stunned guard captain. Come on. We'd best follow him. The parapet was waist-high for Jorinth, a man whose height exceeded 6 feet, but it came up to Jerlo's shoulder. "Here, let me give you a hand." Gidron interlaced his fingers and formed a stirrup. "You're a good man, forget what I've said about you." "Oh, and what have you said about me?" There was a twinkle in the guard captain's eye that had been missing since this farce began. Its return was a sign life would resume its normal rhythm when this ended, if it ever ended. "All good stuff, of course." Jerlo stepped onto Gidron's hands, then onto the coping. He turned and extended a hand to Gidron, who accepted it. "Of course, I never doubted it." A ragged cheer went up from below as the ropes were cut, and a laughing Hadroval lay on the grass bleeding on the daisies pushing up between those knee-high stalks. "Get him on the platform," Jorinth bellowed, and his anger parted the crowd before him. As the wind pulled on his cloak, a shadow fell over the meadow. When he reached the platform, Jorinth withdrew his broadsword and used its tip to indicate where the condemned should stand. "Commander." Jerlo stepped off the staircase and turned. What the hell was Sue doing down here? The ranger's medic was supposed to be guarding Sarn inside the stronghold, not lumbering across the meadow with Grigori hot on his heels. "Why aren't you at your posts?" "I'm a little busy right now, so make your explanations quick." "Sir, you know who has disappeared." "You mean the kid, Sarn?" Jerlo lowered his voice, so only his subordinates heard him. "Yes, your visit upset him, so my wife mixed a sleeping draft, but..." Sue opened and closed his hands, at a loss to explain things. But Jerlo could guess what had happened. He conned his brother into drinking it instead, that canny boy. "So when you checked on him you found the brother but not Sarn, am I right?" Grigori and Sue exchanged a glance, but it was the latter who spoke. "How did you guess?" "It's what I would have done. The real question is, how did he sneak past you two?" Jerlo eyed his subordinates, but they both looked stunned rather than guilty. "That's just it. We don't know. We never left our posts." Sue spread his hands in defeat. "But we think he climbed down," Grigori said. "That kid was in no shape to climb anything, let alone from several thousand feet up the mountain," Jerlo reminded them. "The kid had barely moved the entire time he'd visited him. We think he might be better than he lets on." Sue worriedly scanned the crowd. "No way could a kid who's been bedridden for months make that climb. It's not possible." Jerlo refused to believe it. "Well, he did," Grigori insisted as he folded his arms over his barrel chest. "Those windows are wide enough for one skinny youth to squeeze through, and he has," but the bearish man trailed off before invoking the M word. The unspoken word hung between them, offering itself as a pat explanation. Gidron waved from the platform, indicating Jerlo should join them now. Things were about to get very interesting.